The House Elections Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Cerniglu.
Here.
Representatives Wagella.
Here.
Post.
Here.
Colzar.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Churches.
Present.
Smith.
Present.
And Boyer.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Wagella makes a motion to adopt the minutes from the June 6, 2023 meeting. Without objections, the minutes are adopted. For today's agenda, we will have testimony on the Proposal 2 implementation package, which was introduced on Tuesday, June 6th. We will start with testimony from myself, the Secretary of State's office, Promote the Vote, as well as Mary Clark from the Municipal Clerks Association, and then continue to do the same with each member that introduce a bill in this package. The Elections Committee will go at ease at the call of the chair.
The Elections Committee will come back to order. We will now have testimony from Representative Cerniglu on the Proposal 2 implementation package.
Thank you, Representative Wagella. Last November, Michigan voters overwhelmingly passed Proposal 2, enshrining into our Constitution that no person or legal entity can act to interfere with or unreasonably burden the fundamental right to vote, along with numerous provisions to expand voter access statewide. As I began my work as the House Elections Chair in January, I immediately began working with Promote the Vote, the group that put this important initiative on the ballot. Our Secretary of State's office, our clerks and election workers, Senator Moss, and countless other voting rights groups to codify these provisions into Michigan law. I am so happy to report that earlier this week, my colleagues in the House and Senate and I introduced bill packages to implement all of the provisions of Proposal 2. We introduced legislation for 9 days of early voting, allowing much-needed flexibility for our clerks, and at the same time giving Michigan voters unprecedented access to in-person voting. We introduced legislation giving Michigan voters the convenience of signing up for the permanent absentee voter list. We introduced the expansion of secure ballot drop boxes in every jurisdiction. We introduced an expanded definition of identification. We introduced state-funded prepaid postage. We introduced guidelines for signature matching. And just a few weeks ago, we introduced ballot tracking and a bill allowing military and overseas absentee ballots to be accepted up to 6 days after Election Day if postmarked by Election Day. Today, I am joined by my partners in this massive effort to expand voting access. Agogo Adevbi, to my left, from the Secretary of State's office, is the Deputy Secretary of State. Erica Parisman from Promote the Vote, also to my left, who has been so helpful and engaged in this process, as well as Mary Clark from the Municipal Clerks Association to my right. And all of these individuals have participated in countless work group hours and are here today to answer all of your questions and present this legislation to you. And now I will defer to Mr. Adevbi to also speak to the package.
Good afternoon. I should get a little closer. Thank you, Chair Cerniglu and members of the House Elections Committee for giving me the opportunity to testify today in support of House Bills 4695 to 4702 to implement the will of Michigan voters. Today is another step in the right direction to ensure each voter has the flexibility they need to cast a ballot and have their voices heard in Michigan's elections. A little over 2 years ago, in my then role as Michigan State Director of All Voting is Local, I worked with a number of voting rights experts to publish a series of white papers on the need for electoral reform after the 2020 election cycle. The principles in those white papers were ultimately supported by local governments across our state, including the county commissions in Wayne, Oakland, Washtenaw, and Ingham counties, representing millions of Michiganians. With the conversation of election reform sparked, I worked with a number of election law attorneys, including Promote the Vote's Eric Persman, to draft Proposal 2, which was ultimately passed last November by the voters in a bipartisan manner to amend our state constitution. In February, Secretary Benson gave me the honor of a lifetime and asked me to join her in implementing this amendment. When Secretary Benson and I discussed the possibility of me joining her team, she emphasized that democracy is a team sport, that every voter, every clerk, and all of us, regardless of party affiliation, plays an essential role in keeping our democracy strong. I believe that the bills we will be discussing here today honor that commitment. First and foremost, we believe that these bills will provide the flexibility needed by clerks in counties, cities, and townships of all sizes across our state to implement Proposal 2 in the ways that they need to do it. These bills level the playing field by giving every voter the right to return their absentee ballot to a secure drop box, by mail with prepaid postage, or to use an early voting site where they can feed their ballot directly into a tabulator. These are national best practices that will ensure that the amendment is enacted in a way that maintains the fairness, accuracy, and security that Michigan voters demand. The Secretary and I are also hopeful that the early voting bill will be passed as quickly as possible to give clerks the certainty that they need to begin preparing for the presidential primary in February. I was actually just in Roscommon today talking to a clerk who needs that flexibility, so I'm hopeful that we can do that today. Once these rights are affirmed in state law, the remaining work to carry out the will of voters will be to fully fund the new amendment. I'm grateful for the many conversations that we've had already and will continue to have on this front. The majority of the funds mandated by the constitutional amendment will support every local jurisdiction in this state to ensure local communities do not bear this burden alone. Before I close, I want to thank you, Chair Cernoglu, and for the partnership that we have formed. The many hours we've spent together in work group sessions discussing and working on these pieces of legislation have been informative and enlightening for me and the whole entire department. I know that we're committed to working with you and your whole entire committee in the days ahead. As this truly collaborative process enters its next phase, I am confident that this committee's consideration of these bills can and will yield further improvements and will ultimately advance legislation that will support the will of the voters. I look forward to answering your questions today, and I am thankful to be here.
Thank you. Looks like next we will hear from Erica, I apologize if I said this wrong, Persman.
I don't think I'll reach the mic.
Or maybe we should just switch chairs.
Okay, maybe we'll switch chairs.
Very simple
So you want
Midwestern
me
way
to
to
say
do
early
this.
voting?
We don't have, no, actually, let's. Chair Wagella, I believe we're just going to move right into early voting at this point. I apologize for the,
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
thank you.
sorry.
No problem. Just a little error in coordination there. So early voting is really a massive bill covering a lot of different areas. And we keep referring to those work groups, and a majority of that time was spent on early voting. I believe this was really just a true collaboration between all of the interested parties here, and we've really come to a place where we feel that this is going to be the best product for our voters and for our election workers. So I'm just going to hit on some of the highlights of early voting, and then I will look to my partners to fill in anything that I may have not covered and they would like to highlight, and then we will just open to questions for as to what you would like more detail on, what you have questions about, because there really is a lot here. So early voting sites must be open for 9 days, 8 hours a day. Early voting must start 2 Saturdays before the election and end the Sunday before the election. Election officials can have additional days and hours of early voting. So that's discretionary. There's going to be 3 options for early voting. Single jurisdictions, that's if they want to do it on their own. Jurisdictions within a county can make an agreement with the county to offer the early voting through the county. Jurisdictions can team up with their county clerk. Oh, I'm sorry, I kind of misspoke there. So jurisdictions can team up with their county, or they can team up with each other, with their neighboring jurisdictions to offer the early voting. So early voting results cannot be generated or reported until after 8 p.m. on Election Day. We have greatly expanded what is allowable for a polling place, removing most restrictions. A location owned by any person, candidate, or entity regulated under Michigan Campaign Finance Act will be excluded from that for obvious reasons. But we are allowing polling places to open up to a lot more venues due to the need for 9 days of early voting and so much access. That might prove difficult if we kept it as is. Clerks must provide notice of polling locations and early voting sites to electors for both permanent and temporary changes. The Secretary of State is going to have many duties that are outlined under this bill. Early voting, so on early voting plans, 120 days before the first election in an even-numbered year, each municipality must file an early voting plan with their county clerk. Let's see. Okay, jumping back to the early voting sites. An early voting site can serve electors from more than 6 precincts and multiple municipalities and has no limit on the total number of electors assigned to that precinct. The location and number of sites must take into consideration the expected turnout, population density, public transportation, accessibility, travel time, traffic patterns, and any other factors that election officials consider necessary to enhance the accessibility of early voting sites. Locations must be finalized 60 days before Election Day. If a voter is in line when early voting ends for the day, they can still vote. The early voting poll book must be updated before early voting starts each day to reflect new registered electors and ballots cast. There is a process for closing up the early voting sites and tabulators each day, and there is a process for after the polls close on Election Day. And there's much more included in this bill, but those are kind of what I would pick out as the highlights. I'm happy to pass it to any of my partners to point out what they might see as the highlights.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here today. As Rep. Cerniglu said, there has been a lot of work that has gone into all of these bills. It has been a very collaborative process, and I am grateful to Rep. Cerniglu for having taken the time to work with all the stakeholders to get these bills right. It's been an excellent process. I think Rep. Cerniglu spoke to many of the highlights of the early voting bill that I also wanted to highlight, but I do want to emphasize the flexibility that has been given to clerks in this bill and to municipalities, because it did not make sense for Michigan to have a one-size-fits-all system for early voting because of the great variations among communities in our state. And I think that and so that's reflected in the Constitution and then, of course, in these bills. And one of the most important things about that flexibility is that municipalities will be able to decide which form of conducting early voting makes the most sense for their municipalities and their voters. Of course, they will not be able to enter into an agreement with their county clerk unless the county clerk agrees to that. But we already know that there are a number of county clerks who have indicated to the municipal clerks in their county that they are willing to do that, and plans are underway for that to happen. Of course, one of the benefits of municipalities partnering with each other or with the county is that there will be economies of scale. Instead of each municipality having to hire themselves all of the poll workers and provide all of the tabulators and provide all of the supervision for each day of early voting, they will share those things, share the supervisory duties and share the equipment so that the entire cost doesn't fall on one municipality. But again, these decisions are made at the municipal level. The municipality gets to decide how they want to conduct early voting. The expansion of polling places is very important because clerks are already having difficulty finding sufficient polling places just for Election Day, and there was a recognition that many of the places that are used currently for Election Day will not be available for 9 days of early voting. So I think it's very important that that provision is in the bill. And, you know, the bill really represents a roadmap. Rep. Cerniglu mentioned the municipal agreements, the county agreements. In the bill, there are details about what has to be included in those agreements and what has to be included in the early voting plan. And then the Secretary of State's office will provide templates for all of those. So this is a process that takes quite a lot of planning, and that planning really starts 5 months out before the first statewide election in an even-numbered year. So pretty soon, for 2024, the county clerks will need to let the municipal clerks know whether they intend to offer a county agreement, and then there are a number of subsequent deadlines when the municipal clerks have to indicate what they intend to do. The agreements have to be signed, the plans have to be submitted, and then a county-wide plan gets submitted 3.5 months before the first statewide election, and that county-wide plan has to show that every single voter in the county will have access to at least one early voting site, or indicate that a clerk did not provide the information so that the Secretary of State will need to follow up on that. So I think the bill is a very good roadmap for what needs to be done. As many clerks have mentioned, they really want to see this become law as soon as possible so that they can, you know, officially work with that roadmap to do their planning, which, as I said, is already underway. Thank you.
We are now all available to answer your questions on early voting.
Thank you so much for your testimony on House Bills 4695 and 4696. Are there any questions from committee members? Representative Smith?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here. Sorry, I can't see some of you real well. It's great that you could be here and speak out about this a little bit. I have several questions. I'll try to start with just a couple. So you're right, there is a lot here in this and so much to unpack. One of the things that I noticed, our current law requires video monitoring on all the ballot drop boxes. So in this proposal, you guys are going to strike that. So I'm curious, do you feel that it's important to not have surveillance on the drop boxes?
So that's actually not in this particular bill. However,
Oh, that's another one. Yeah,
would it be
sorry.
all right to hold
I'll
that
wait on that
until?
one.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Will you still be here? Because I thought the Secretary of State office should maybe answer that one.
He's going to be here.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so with the early voting question that I have here, then the next one would be, can you help me explain and understand how this will work with these these centers? Are they going to have print-on-demand ballots? Are they going to have paper ballots where who's ever partnering or contracting together? How are you going to separate that?
Go ahead.
So, yes, they will all have paper ballots. Ballot on demand is something that is used in other states in early voting centers. In the bill, the Secretary of State is required to investigate ballots on demand. So we don't know whether that will be something that will be adopted in Michigan or not. It depends on the result of the investigation that the Secretary of State's office does. But there's also provisions in the bill for the tabulators to be programmed to accept the ballots from whatever precincts are covered by each early voting site. And we had many discussions with representatives from the Bureau of Elections who said, yes, this is definitely possible. It can be done.
As a person that has to actually produce this early voting work on the system, I can tell you we currently have, it would be considered split, so you would have multiple ballot styles based on, just as we do now, if you have multiple school districts in November, or you have multiple county commission seats within a precinct, you would have that same variety of ballots, and the ballot that was applicable for the voter in front of you, they would get a certain ballot style. So it's something that we train to, and we do in elections all the time. So I'm very comfortable with it.
I have one more follow-up with that, if I may. So during the time of the early voting, when, I have to get back into my thought there. Right, oh, yes. So at the end of the night, do you expect because there's going to be multiple jurisdictions that are involved with this, do you hope that the ballots are taken out of the bin? Are they going to be secured in a ballot bag? Are they going to stay in there for the whole 9 days and then removed before the voting, like the election day?
So the tabulators that are used, as has been said, are programmed to accept multiple ballot styles. The bill allows local, whoever the lead is in any particular one of the 3 agreement options or methodologies, however you want to explain it, to remove the ballots, put them in a sealed container, capture that seal number, just as we do now when we empty the ballots out of the ballot box at the end of a regular precinct voting day. You have the option, depending on your size, if you want to then, the next night, open that bag, add ballots to it, and reseal, or whether you want to do 9 separate bags, each day's bag sealed and remain sealed until election night.
Okay, yep, thank you for clarifying that.
We have a question from Representative DeBoyer.
Thank you, Chair. Just follow up on that, if I may, and then I do have a question. Will we segregate, or will for example, if the county clerk is executing this, will we segregate the ballots out of that tabulator by precinct in jurisdiction, or will they reside in those ballot bags for the 22 months of retention?
It is my understanding they will remain in the bag. I'm not, I don't know that the bill specifies it, but in our conversations, they would remain sealed.
So who would maintain custody of those ballots? Say after the end of the, which clerk from which jurisdiction? Because you're gonna have multiples.
We've also got the, who's interested in,
Come on up.
we just didn't have enough space at the table to get all of that.
If we operate a county vote center, then we would maintain them for the 22 months. In the bill, it does have language that says that they would remain together unless there's a recount or an audit, in which case you're required by law to go in there and sort them according to their precinct.
So the county clerk's office would be the keeper of those?
For those
For the
deciding
22
to
months?
join with a county, so there's three
Right,
options.
right, yep, got it, okay,
And the board of canvassers.
right, okay.
Would be the
So
sorting.
I just want to shift a little bit, different topic in the bill. So the bill that goes to great lengths to address where these polling locations can be located at, right? And one of the things that, sometimes what's in there is very important, but sometimes what isn't in there is even more important, and sometimes what's removed from there is sometimes the most important. So on page 8 of the bill, starting at line 2, it's lined out that the sponsor of political committees and independent committees and how they define what those things are, including Michigan Campaign Finance Act, subsidiaries of a corporation, of a labor union, a local labor organization, if the corporation or the labor organization is considered a sponsor. That is struck from the bill. I'll go right to the point of the question. Will we be able to hold polling locations in union halls under this bill?
Yeah, it's certainly possible for us to host early voting sites at different locations across the state. That's up to the local clerk.
So that is just open to the local clerk?
Well, as long as they're not a political action committee. If it's not owned by a political action committee, that building or a candidate, then it's not allowed.
Okay, that's interesting to me. Because we offer other discretion in the bill where we say things like, as long as the polling location is at a convenient place for the electorate. Who defines convenient?
The clerk,
The clerk defines convenient.
yeah.
So if the clerk is challenged that that's not convenient, it rests with the clerk.
Well, there's always a process, of course, with appealing to the Bureau of Elections. Of course, people can go to court.
Okay.
There's always a check.
No, that's fair.
Every
I mean,
every
that's-
clerk has a check on
Yeah,
them. according
that's
to the
fair.
law.
But I think that when we're dealing with something as significant as fundamentally, totally modifying the election process, I think we need to be much more specific with the
Mr. DeBoer.
words that we use.
Sorry,
That's-
I believe Clerk Clark would also like to add something.
Each municipality has an election commission that would have to approve. It's not an
Yep.
independent clerk decision.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other
Thank you, Chair.
questions on House Bills 4695 and 4696, early voting? Seeing none, we will go at ease.
Thank you. The Elections Committee will come back to order. And we will now have testimony on House Bill 4697, introduced by Representative Colazar, who will now testify on the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members. The purpose of this bill is to implement the will of the voters from Prop 2, which this has to do with ballot drop boxes. Basically, what the summary of the bill would say is that there must be at least one secure drop box for every municipality and at least one drop box for every 15,000 registered voters in municipalities with more than 15,000. So if I look at my district, for example, I've got 5 municipalities, and that would apply to 3 of them in terms of above the 15,000 threshold. The drop boxes also would have to be, that we're describing, would have to be funded by the state. They would also be used for the return of completed absent voter applications as well as absent voter ballots. The secure drop boxes must be distributed equitably throughout the municipality. And secure drop boxes must be accessible 24 hours a day during the 40 days before the election until 8 p.m. on election day. And I'll keep it quick because I know we got a lot, and I'd be happy to answer Representative Smith's question, among others.
Rep. Smith, you may now repeat that question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Rep. Colazar. So yes, as you heard me mention previously, current law says we need to have that surveillance on there. This removes that. So I'm just curious, more particularly to the Secretary of State, if you think that that's a good idea.
And I'll start with it because I know he wants to answer it, but I work in government, so I like to hear myself talk. So I think it's important to point out that there are changes coming, and there should be changes coming to that, because I would agree. But there is an accessibility component we are concerned about in terms of internet access in certain parts of the state. So with that, I'm going to turn it over.
Yeah, this is,
Here, do you want to?
yeah, let's switch seats. This is something I've spoken to the Secretary personally on, and we still believe that there is a need for cameras on drop boxes, as is currently defined in the current legislation that we have on the books. I think the reason why there is some flexibility that's been added to this new piece of legislation is the concern over rural communities where there isn't connectivity. There are major parts of the state that don't have any internet access. So does a camera work when you're not recording anything, when you're not picking anything up? So I think one of the things we have to think about is how much is it going to actually cost to have cameras across the state at every single drop box in a way that conforms with the existing law. And we certainly are welcome to figuring out other approaches to make sure that drop boxes are secure and voters can have confidence in the system.
Okay, thank you. It seems very contradictory. I mean, it's one thing that we wanted to have it on there, and now we're removing it and we're adding hundreds and thousands, possibly drop boxes throughout the state and taking away some security measures for that. I totally understand the availability, but
Well, we are certainly welcome to partner with you in this legislature to provide more funding for internet broadband access across the state, so
Yep,
that
I think
every
we're getting
single
there.
community has internet access, and we can have cameras on all of these drop boxes. I think that's a goal that everyone shares, to ensure that there's connectivity across the state. And, the Secretary and I strongly believe in having cameras on each drop box. But there are some practical considerations that have to be taken into account as we implement this bill. So I think for us, from the department's standpoint, if we're going to stay with the current law, let's make sure we're providing the resources necessary to actually enact it in a way that's fair to local and small communities.
Sure. Thank you. I myself come from an extremely rural district, and as a former township clerk, I get that, and that was a challenge. I thought, oh boy, now I have to have a surveillance on my drop box here, but we made it work, and with the ongoing partnering, broadband is definitely becoming much more accessible, and so I'm hoping that we can work through that and get that resolved.
Yeah, and we're committed to working with you and anyone on this community to make this happen.
Thank you.
Looks like there are no further questions. Thank you, Representative Colzar. We will now have testimony on House Bill 4698, introduced by Representative Hope, who will testify on this bill. Yeah, there you go.
Oops, they turned the mic off on me. This bill is pretty straightforward and it makes fairly minor changes. One thing it does is define educational institution. That term's used in the constitutional amendment. It's not defined, so there's a definition included that is meant to be inclusive and fairly broad. The other change that's made here is it allows for people to use local ID. If they live in a jurisdiction where they can get a county ID or city ID, it permits that as an acceptable form of ID.
Thank you, Representative Hope. Are there questions? You have a question, Representative DeBoyer? Fantastic.
Thank you, Chair. What provisions are set forth in law that require any kind of vetting of an individual if a local municipality issues ID to determine if it is indeed who they are? Are they a United States citizen? Is there any of that exists?
I'll let you take that one.
Sure. Well, I think there's two different things. There's a process to get an ID, and then there's a process to register to vote. So when you register to vote, you have to affirm that you're a U.S. citizen. You have to go through a number of steps to constantly reaffirm that process throughout, from the time you're registering to the time you vote. And of course, it's illegal if you break that. And we have a process to ensure that that is put on the books. So I think that process has worked in the past, and we are confident in it, and we're going to continue to use it going forward. It's not a new process.
Has the Secretary of State's office ever registered a non-American or non-U.S. citizen to vote?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. So the answer is there is no provision to determine who the individuals are if it's issued out of a local jurisdiction.
Well, I mean, it's up to the local jurisdiction. They're the one issuing the ID.
Right. But I would have to accept that at another jurisdiction if it were to come in as proof of identification?
Well, no, because they would be registered. The registration would be in that local jurisdiction. So the local jurisdiction is bound by the local laws. They have all the information about the voter, whether they're registered with identification showing that they're a U.S. citizen, whether they've attested that they're a U.S. citizen. It's not, you can't take, if you have for example, the city of Detroit has local ID. You couldn't go to Ann Arbor and vote if you're a city of Detroit resident, right?
But you could have their ID if you had been.
If you had been, I mean.
If you had been a citizen there, you could have their ID.
You'd have to move. You'd have to move locations. So.
Correct, but you could still have that ID.
Sure.
Right.
But,
okay, that's all.
I just think that we're getting down wormholes here.
No, we're getting down paths of security for an election to determine that the individual that's casting a ballot is indeed the person who they claim to be. That's where we're at.
And there are penalties if people break the law, and we've constantly enforced that law, and we will continue to do that in the state.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Perriesman.
Can you hear me without the mic? I can't get close to it.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to add that the purpose of identification for election purposes, which is what this bill amends, when you go into a polling place or a clerk's office and you're asked to show photo identification. You are being asked to confirm your identity, not your eligibility to vote. You are being asked to confirm your identity. So in the instructions that the clerks use to train their staff and to train the poll workers who are looking at those IDs, they're told you look at the face on the ID and the name on the ID, and you compare that with the name that's been given to you and the face of the person that's standing in front of you. That's it. That's what the purpose of identification for election purposes is. Rep. DeBoyer, I think you're asking about a different question, which is determining the eligibility of people to vote, and that is not something that election ID is meant to address.
That's not what I was asking, but I'll let you go.
Did you have a different question?
The question is the ID that we're using, what is the level of validation of the ID? When it comes from the Secretary of State's office, a Michigan driver's license, it has a criteria behind it. If we start accepting IDs that are being issued without criteria for identification purposes, how do we know that that is a valid identification? That's all I'm asking.
Well, school IDs are also acceptable and have been acceptable for years. That's not new. We're just changing the definition of educational institution in here. Other IDs that have been acceptable for years are different from their issuance. The process of issuance of those is different from the process of issuance for driver's licenses and state IDs. So they're all different. There are all different types of IDs, and many different types of IDs have been acceptable for voter identification for years.
I see no other questions. Thank you, Representative Hope. We will now have testimony on House Bill 4699, introduced by Representative Burns, who will testify to the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. To begin, House Bill 4699 was drafted to implement the requirements of permanent mail ballot voting as part of Proposal 2. This bill requires that registered electors have the right to have an absent voter ballot sent to them before each election by submitting a single signed absent voter ballot application that would cover all future elections. No further application would need to be sent, and this streamlines the process and empowers voters to choose a method that best suits their needs. Voters will additionally remain on the list without the need for a new application, even if they move within the state and update their voter registration address. There are additional elements of the bill that speak to the process for a voter to remove themselves or to be removed from the permanent list, and the required notification when removal occurs. Ultimately, this bill enacts the will of Michigan voters, who we know overwhelmingly approved Proposal 2 in 2022. The people of Michigan have told us in no uncertain terms that they want unfettered access to the ballot box and that they want their voting rights enshrined in our state constitution. Proposal 2 creates change that will positively impact Michigan voters for generations to come, and House Bill 4699 is one part of this critical process. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Burns. So will this one-time application, will there be any more need for the permanent list? Like there's a check right now that you click and you get a permanent AV list. Is this just taking that place? Maybe that's a better question for the Secretary of State. Or will there be two lists potentially?
So, as currently exists in the bill, this discontinues the permanent AV list and transitions it into a permanent mail list, where you have one application, your signature is verified, you get on the list, and then you get your ballot, and then your signature is verified again when you submit the ballot.
Okay, and one more follow-up. So the voter wants to be put on that, the one-time application, and they are sent a AV ballot every election going forward.
Yes.
Let's say there's a period of time where the voter does not send ballots back, and there's no history of them voting. Is there an automatic drop-off with them being removed from this list? Do they just continue to stay on this permanently without, or is there going to be an audit put in place that you guys will be monitoring this?
So the process for removal from the mail list matches the process for removal from the active voter list. So if you don't vote for a certain period of time, you're no longer an active voter. If you don't vote for a certain period of time, you're no longer in the mail ballot list and you're no longer automatically sent.
So that portion will remain the same?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Representative Burns. And also, I just wanted to briefly address Representative DeBoyer. One of your questions, I apologize for not saying this sooner at the appropriate time, but I'm sure you're aware that the local ID is part of the Constitution with Proposal 2. Okay, just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page with that. So now we will have testimony on House Bill 4700 and 4701, introduced by Representative Reingans and Representative Morgan. So if we could have you both up there together for this one, or these two. You may testify on the bill, beginning with Representative Reingans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Carrie Reingans from the 47th District, which is the Ann Arbor, Washtenaw, and Jackson County areas. I'm here to testify today on HB 4700, which is about mail-in ballots. So thanks to previous constitutional amendments, we have had expanded mail-in ballots, opportunities for Michiganders, and now we are further codifying what was passed this last November in the constitutional amendment, and we're providing more information for local clerks to use as guidelines on how to match signatures in mail-in ballots, how to give voters an opportunity if there's a question about their signature, and how to make sure that we are paying postage, prepaid postage for the ballots and the ballot applications for people to come to send their ballots back and their applications back. So this Bill 4700 gives specific and clear instructions to the clerks for implementation of Prop 2. And I'd also like to say, in addition to this, thank you very much to the chair for including me as a non-elections committee member in this bill package. I was very excited to collect signatures for Prop 2, and I'm very excited to be working on a bill in this package. Happy to take questions after Rep. Morgan.
Trade places here. Thank you so much, Madam Chair and colleagues. Thank you for having me. My name is Jason Morgan. I would like to offer very brief remarks on my bill, House Bill 4701. House Bill 4701 serves as a companion bill to Rep. Reingans' House Bill 4700, which implements the permanent AV list reflecting the change made to the Constitution by Michigan voters. Well, you have just heard from Rep. Reingans on the importance of the changes outlined in House Bill 4700. HB 4701 would make complementary changes to the Code of Criminal Procedure. Amending these sentencing guidelines is imperative to the effective implementation of House Bill 4700, and this bill cannot go into effect unless that bill is enacted. I will keep it short and sweet. Thank you so much, Madam Chair and committee members. I am pleased to be here as part of this process.
Thank you both. Do we have any questions? I see no questions. Thank you, Representative Reingans and Representative Morgan. The Elections Committee will go at ease at the call of the chair.
We will now have testimony on House Bill 4702, introduced by Rep. Cerniglu, who is going to testify on this bill, along with Mary Clark from MAMC.
Thank you. So this bill allows Michigan election law to increase the precinct size to not more than 5,000 instead of 2,999 active registered electors in the city, ward, township, or village. This was brought to us by the clerks as a request that I believe they've been pursuing for a while now. But with all of these new laws in place, with 9 days of early voting, as well as increased absentee voting, now more than ever, it makes sense to allow for this precinct size increase, as well as this will allow us to use our resources much more effectively as we move forward with implementing Proposal 2. I have Mary Clark, Clerk Clark, and Clerk Chris Swope with me today to speak to this. They are both from the Municipal Clerks Association, and they will speak more on why this is so important to our clerks. Thank you.
I'll jump in. Thank you, Representative Cerniglu and Mr. Chair. This is an important bill, and we have been asking for this since the passage of Proposal 3 of 2018 with the large increase of the number of people who are voting by mail. It has decreased the turnout in the precincts. And now with the addition of the 9 days of early voting, it's important that we have this and that we have it enacted soon. We have the ability to, if we're able to reduce the number of precincts that we have, that without the having to buy additional equipment would free up tabulators and the voter assistance terminals that are required for early voting to allow us to have early voting without purchasing some of the additional equipment that might be needed. For example, if I'm able to consolidate some precincts before the January or the February presidential primary, I can release some additional equipment to my county that could be dispersed to other jurisdictions that may be one precinct jurisdiction and don't have an additional tabulator or voter assist terminal. So it's not just necessary, but it's timely. And I would say that this is a maximum, and it is not required of any clerk to make any changes. So a local clerk who knows their community can make a data-driven decision regarding what consolidations they want to do. And these, generally the clerk drives this, but it is the precinct boundaries are actually adopted by the election commission of each jurisdiction. So, for example, in my jurisdiction, that township, that election commission, city election commission is comprised of myself, my city assessor, and my city attorney, and township boards have different makeup, but it is not simply a clerk decision to finalize this.
And Representative, if I could clarify a misstatement I made before in our discussion. This election commission I was referring to does precinct boundaries. Your question about precinct sites actually goes to the full governing body. So in my case as a township, it would go to our full township board to approve the site. So I stand corrected on that, and thank you. I am overjoyed that this bill is here to at least be discussed today. And I will use my particular jurisdiction as an example for you. I'm from the clerk from Delta Township, which is just west of us. I have 27,000 registered voters, 25,000 active voters, because we always have ones that are in the process of cancellation countdown. I have one area of my township that is what I call landlocked, It's older, it's established, there's no room for expansion. I know what my percent of voters are that are using non-precinct day method to vote, and that could enable me to combine, I have in mind, I'd like to go from 16 precincts to 14. I don't need, because I purchased extra equipment, I don't need those 2 extra sets of equipment that cost $11,000, but they were paid for with HAVA dollars, and I can give them to my county clerk to use, because at this point, Eaton County is looking at 4 early voting sites. And so I have equipment for mine and my neighboring township that is going to partner with me, but we are 5.5 years into a 10-year cycle of election equipment, and I think it's fiscally responsible if we can find ways to not have to buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of new equipment when it could be available. It's optional. Only your medium to larger jurisdictions are likely to do this because we have multiple precincts. But remember, over 1,000 precincts in Michigan, or jurisdictions, have only a single precinct. So it is not going to be widespread, and it is optional. Over 1,200 of our clerks are, like me, a township clerk, and we're all on the ballot. We're all elected. We're not appointed. I promise you, we will not commit political suicide. Thank you.
We'll open it up for questions. I actually had a couple questions and a potential suggestion, and I'm curious the thoughts on it. Any consideration with over the next couple of years, because little of my background. I lived in Arizona for 5 years, early voting, vote by mail out there. I think that this is something we'll probably see over time, like more and more people will do, but I'm not sure people will vote early initially or vote by mail at higher numbers initially, just because I think there's a learning curve. Is there any consideration for, next year's presidential election, having a smaller number, and then as time goes on, that number moves up to 5,000? Because I believe the number right now is like 2,999, if I'm not incorrect. That's the only thing I'm thinking of is next year's presidential election, making sure we don't have unnecessary lines at the polls and make a miscalculation. I don't know. Maybe I'm off base here. I don't know a ton about this, but I just have a question about it.
For another question that I was asked outside of committee, I reviewed all of my presidential primary elections back to 2000 and looked at and compared them to my voter turnout in the presidential primary versus my voter turnout in the November general that attaches to that primary. My highest voter turnout for the presidential primary was 48%. My highest voter turnout for November was 78.2%. We happen to have in my community a large percent of voter participation. It is very rare for us to go under 70% for a gubernatorial or a presidential November election. So I think that the numbers for the presidential primary are not really going to be negatively impacted at all by this. And it isn't going to be every precinct. Like I said, for my example, I would only be consolidating and going from 16 to 14 because I do have growth areas. I do have areas that don't have as high a number, a percentage of people voting by absentee. It gives clerks flexibility to do what's best for their individual jurisdiction.
And I think to raise again the point of the equipment, if we do not have this in place by the time you break for the summer, essentially there will need to be more equipment before the presidential primary for early voting sites purchased. And so you lose the opportunity completely for that potential savings. And as I said, I think clerks will be doing this in a data-driven way and will be looking at their own communities. And, you know, even though the maximum right now is $29.99, most precincts are well below that, and clerks will keep it well below that. Nobody wants to push the limit where we don't have to, but you end up with a situation where, oh, if I put these two areas together, it's going to be just over, and then you lose out on that opportunity. But again, you know, we did see a huge increase after the 2018 election in people voting by mail, and now we will have 9 days of early voting, and as a local official or as a local community, that's 9 days of election workers. We're estimating that it's 5,000 per site, primarily for the paying of election workers, and there's no extra pot of money for that. And then, so if we can reduce a couple of precincts and achieve some savings that way, it's really going to benefit your locals.
Thank you. Representative Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I support this, and I wondered maybe if we could have a discussion later on, too, about just possibly expanding to provide a definition of a early voting site or center, or including the number of early voting precincts that are contained in this. It's just extremely important to make sure that all our voters have accessibility in a reasonable amount of time, and so I don't know if you guys are open to that at a later time.
Yes, I mean, if time available, absolutely. I'd love to have the discussion. I've done a lot of analysis of what it's going to cost to do early voting. There's a lot of pieces, there's a lot of moving parts to it. I've looked at my percentage of people who vote based on my November gubernatorial or presidential elections, and have a really, I think, a pretty accurate cost of what it's going to cost in terms of the number of workers based on how many voters I can anticipate. Other states that have all of these options land pretty much on a third, meaning a third will vote early voting, a third will still vote by absentee ballot, and a third will do the traditional, I want to go to the election polls on election day. And you can do the math on those numbers and figure out what your potential participation is in each of those. And I think there's a lot of discussion. I mean, I think it's a lot of information that we could share that might be helpful in your decisions.
Thank you.
And I would just add, in House Bill 4695, it defines what an early voting site is. So that might help answer that question. And Representative DeBoyer.
I just wanted to say to Chair Sunderglue, it's a good day because I actually think I support this as well. So we're all in it together on this one.
Well, I knew that it would come one day, Representative DeBoyer. So I actually just want to note, I appreciate your questions, Representative Wagella, and I knew these questions actually would come up, which is why I opted to, introduce this bill myself, because, there's always that concern. Are we somehow suppressing access? Are we somehow going to have, issues with this where it will result in that? So I did take the time to have conversations with clearly the clerks have overwhelmingly been telling me they needed this for years, but outside experts that analyze voting behavior, and I've had all of the conversations led to the same place, that with this early voting and with these absentee increases, that and this really unprecedented access to in-person voting, that we are just going to be increasing access so exponentially that this this is going to work out, and I'm confident that this is going to be useful to our clerks, our local jurisdictions, and that we can really make this change work. And in the past, there has not been an indication that there was any ceiling that we were hitting up against, that we were, the only long lines really that we encountered were on campuses, because we had such an amazing youth vote turnout. And also there are some other things that we could potentially fix on campuses that, we can work through there, but they are not due to precinct size. So I do appreciate your questions, because that is something that concerned me as well. So do we have further questions, or
Do we have any other questions? If not, then we will go at ease.
Thank you. The Elections Committee will come back to order. We do have a few individuals who I believe may want to offer some additional testimony. Vanessa Guerra, I apologize, from the Saginaw County Clerk, also from the County Clerks Association. I appreciate you answering some of the questions earlier. Would you like to offer additional testimony? No? Okay. Thank you so much for being here. It indicates support of the bill. We've already had Mary Clark and Chris Swope from the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks answer some questions for us, but would you like to provide any additional testimony at this time? Oh, thank you very much. We also have Sherry Ritchie from PIME, who would like to testify, who wishes to speak on several of these bills. Welcome, Ms. Ritchie.
Good afternoon, Chair Cernoglu and members of the committee. Thank you for hearing testimony today. My name is Sherry Ritchie, and I'm a born and raised Michigander, Michiganian. They both work. I'm here to speak on behalf of PIME, which is Pure Integrity Michigan Elections, regarding House Bills 4697, 4698, 4699, and 4702, not all 8 of them. This statement from PIME comes with the support of Michigan Fair Elections, Stand Up Michigan, and the Freedom Alliance Project, altogether representing over 500,000 Michigan voters and growing. PIME is an issue-based, nonpartisan movement that supports election integrity in the U.S. and Michigan constitutions. And before I really get into the meat of the statement, I'd like to preface my statement by saying, we know all these bills are implementation of Proposal 2, which is now in our Constitution. So our purpose here is to offer input to constructing the new rules, procedures, and laws. So to say that we oppose something isn't really the right word. We're just offering our thoughts and observations of some of the things written for food for thought as these bills get amended and tweaked before they get voted on. Fair enough? All right. And I did have handouts for my statement today, if you'd like to follow along. PIME opposes 4697 as written for the following reasons. We understand that Prop 2 calls for one ballot drop box for each municipality and for every 15,000 voters for municipalities. But we believe that providing more drop boxes than this would add further to the cost to taxpayers and only raise more concerns about potential voter fraud or fraudulent ballots. Ballot drop boxes should not be equipped with mailbox-style levers. There's no reason for this since ballot harvesting is not allowed in Michigan. All ballot drop boxes should be equipped with a slot no larger than necessary to accept a single ballot. And I learned yesterday at the Senate committee from Clerk Clark that there's going to be a catalog of drop boxes for each clerk to choose from. And we just recommend the type with the tiny little slit slot. And we also question why the video monitoring requirement was struck and the word may. There was some explanation given to that today, and we appreciate hearing that. My comment on video monitoring would be, can we ensure that the drop boxes are placed in these rural locations where they have some internet connection? There's got to be something in an entire jurisdiction that has internet. I don't think Michigan is that backwards, even in rural areas where we don't have some kind of internet connection. So maybe placement of drop boxes should be required to be where there's internet connection. Does that make sense? So that's my point there. Furthermore, Pine believes that live stream of video surveillance should be made available for public viewing, and this would also bolster confidence in the election process. I'm going to skip the next section. Pine opposes, as written, House Bill 4698 for the following reason: introducing the educational institution definition to include any accrediting institution lowers the standard for ID requirements. 72%, and some polls have said as high as 80% of Michigan voters support voter ID laws. And we've attached a link to an article here that you can look up by the Washington Examiner. So I want to say we also understand that the ID at the polling booth, at the polling location, is just to verify who that person is by face, name, address, and so forth. And we were taught to look at the signature on the driver's license and verify with that what's on the cube in the e-poll book, right? Clerk Swope, I worked for you last year. We were in charge of at the poll to verify the signature on what was presented to us with what was in the e-poll book. That's what I was taught. That's what I did. We understand, though, that these IDs are not eligible to be used for voter registration purposes. Okay, fair enough? All right, Pine opposes as written House Bill 4699 for the following reasons. Section 759G is too vague and again puts too much authority and control of a partisan office, which is that of the SOS, and that can change, in the cycles. Specifics should also be laid out in the bill, like how and when the discontinuation list will be managed and when the discontinuation happens, i.e. a deadline or time limit. Discontinuation of the permanent mail ballot request that's on file. And that's also it's in the language here to be set up for 6 years, and we believe that's too long. And there was some discussion today about that as well, with what happens if nobody, someone signs up for that but then doesn't vote for 2 years or 3 years, but we're going to let it go for 6 years before they're taken off. So that would be something I would say to look at again and maybe shorten the 6 year to 2 or 4 or something. All right, and then in section 759E, number 3, it says an absent voter ballot application for all future elections can be rescinded for the following reasons. We propose that the word can should be replaced by must. Must be rescinded based on one of these following procedures. Therefore, requiring the clerk to rescind it. Precincts, all right. Pine opposes as written House Bill 4702 for the following reasons. I'm going to just skip this one too because we heard a lot about this yesterday and today, and we learn like we all learn. So I'm now in favor of 5,000 precinct size. All right, page 2. Is there some reason the oversight on the number of voting machines is being removed? Does this have the potential to create longer lines at the polls? Just a question to think about and look at on this bill. Pine appreciates being able to exercise our right to participate and be heard in the legislative process, and we urge lawmakers to dutifully and thoughtfully consider what is proposed here and amend these bills for the reasons given. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question for Ms. Ritchie? I see no questions, so thank you for your testimony. We will now have Erica Parisman from Promote the Vote join us once again. And I'm sure everyone in this room knows, but if anyone's viewing offline, I'm not sure if we ever got to the point where mentioning that Promote the Vote is the group behind Proposal 2, which is why we've been working so closely with them to implement Proposal 2. So welcome again, and we're happy to hear testimony on any of the bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Sonoglu. Yes, indeed, Promote the Vote was the sponsor of both Proposal 3 in 2018 and Proposal 2 in 2022. And we have been, as I said earlier, grateful to be part of the work group that was working on crafting these bills. I'd just like to mention briefly about House Bill 4697, the Dropbox bill. We have participated in some of the discussions relating to video monitoring. There were, as mentioned before, many concerns about internet access. I believe actually there are some jurisdictions in our state, some municipalities that don't have internet access. So the ability to have a Dropbox with video monitoring would be impossible in those jurisdictions unless you're talking about some sort of monitoring that is not connected to the internet. And I think there have been some discussions about maybe that is possible, and I think we're going to have some further discussions about it. But I just wanted to mention that Promote the Vote does not object to video monitoring. This was really something that was raised by the clerks of the concern about having a requirement in statute that could not be met by some jurisdictions and what liability that would open them up to. So I think there will be some further discussions about that, and I'm hopeful that we can reach a consensus that works. I also wanted to speak briefly regarding House Bill 4702. And Promote the Vote supports the concept of the expansion of precinct sizes, but believes that it is premature to go all the way up to 5,000 now. The number that Promote the Vote would recommend is 4,000. The reason being that we simply don't have a lot of data right now about what voters are going to do in terms of which method of voting they're going to choose. We had a very high number of absentee voters in 2020, probably related to COVID. It was almost 59, it was almost 60%, 59% I think it was, in November of 2020. But then in November of 2022, when, vaccines were widely available and COVID was less of an issue, that percentage of voters who voted absentee dropped down to 42%. So our concern is exactly the concern that Rep. Rogella raised earlier. Without knowing exactly what is going to happen in terms of how many voters are going to choose early voting, how many are going to stick with absentee, and how many are going to be in person on Election Day, it might be an unintended consequence of going up to 5,000 now that we do increase lines on Election Day. So I just mention that for consideration. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I see no questions. Thank you for your testimony. All right, so we have many cards that have been submitted today, and I'm not going to read them because they're quite a lot. However, they will be reflected in the record. Thank you again to everyone who's been here today testifying or watching, and to our committee for this extra committee meeting. And just real briefly, thank you, Steve Menkovic from our Legislative Services Bureau. I know you sat through these many, many work groups, and you probably didn't have to. So you were definitely going above and beyond. And I really do think that, this work, with these work groups and having all the stakeholders on the same page and the House and Senate in complete alignment on this bills is, really, a very collaborative effort that I hope we can continue. So thank you all. And there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.